The trade outpost smelled of rust, sweat, and despair. Lyra walked slowly, her feet bare, her skin thin and pale from hunger. Her clothes were torn, her eyes hollow, her stomach empty for days. Each step was heavy, like her body had forgotten how to move. People passed by her without looking. To them, she was just another starving alien girl, another shadow among many. She saw a man sitting near a broken food stall. He was human, strong-looking, with a calm face and a gray jacket covered in dust. He stirred a pot over a small flame, the scent of real food rising in the cold air. Lyra's lips parted, and she took one shaky step closer, then another. No one had given her anything in 3 days, not even a look. She stood in front of him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have no credits," she said, her throat dry, "but you can use me, human, for one meal." The human's eyes stopped moving, his spoon hanging still. He looked up at her, slowly, like he couldn't believe what she just said. Lyra stood tall, or at least tried to, but her knees trembled. She wasn't sure if it was from fear or hunger. The man didn't speak right away. He looked at her, really looked, not like others who saw her only as a thing to buy. Then, without a word, he stood up, picked up the pot, and started walking away. Lyra blinked, her heart sinking. She had failed again. Just like before, but to her surprise, he stopped and turned his head slightly. "Follow me," he said quietly. She hesitated, unsure if it was a trick, but her stomach screamed louder than not her fear, so she followed him, step by step, her legs weak, her breath short. They walked through narrow metal alleys, past broken machines and burned-out lights. Finally, they reached a small shack made of scrap metal and old ship parts. Inside was warm, and the floor was clean. The man placed the pot on a small heating unit and handed her a bowl. Steam rose from the soup. Real soup, not powder or fake food. Blocks. Lyra sat on the floor and took the bowl with shaking hands. She expected him to make a move, to touch her, to demand something. But he just sat across the room, silent, watching the fire. She took a sip, then another. Tears rolled down her face as the warmth filled her belly. No one had fed her like this since her mother died during the evacuation. She looked at him and asked, "Why?" The man didn't answer right away. He poked at the fire and said, "You're not currency." Lyra stared at him, confused. Everywhere else, her body was the only thing anyone wanted. She had traded touches for scraps, kisses for crumbs. But this man, this human, didn't even look at her like that. "What's your name?" he asked. Still not facing her. "Lyra," she said quietly, "from Kalos Prime." He nodded slowly. "I'm Jason." Silence filled the room again, but this time it didn't feel cold. It felt like safety, the kind Lyra hadn't known. In a long time, she ate slowly, saving each bite. Not knowing if this would be her last meal, after she finished, she placed the empty bowl down and whispered, "Do you want me now?" Jason looked up sharply, his eyes angry, not at her, but at the world that made her ask that. "No," he said firmly. "You sleep, you rest, you're safe here." She didn't understand him. What kind of man gave food and shelter and wanted nothing in return? She curled up near the heater, not trusting, but too tired to resist. As her eyes closed, she kept expecting him to approach. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed in his corner, cleaning a broken tool and watching the fire like it was more important than her, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months. Lyra slept with a full stomach and without fear. Outside, the wind howled through the metal alleys. Inside, the quiet warmth stayed. The morning light was pale and weak as it slipped through cracks in the metal walls. Lyra opened her eyes slowly, not sure if she had really slept or just dreamed of sleeping. Her body still ached, but her stomach was not empty anymore. She sat up quickly, looking around. Part of her still expected to wake up chained or hurt. But there was no pain, no ropes, no cold hands on her skin. Only the sound of someone cooking again. Jason was already up, stirring something in a small metal pan. He didn't speak, didn't turn around, but he knew she was awake. "You snore," he said flatly. Lyra blinked, unsure if he was joking. Then she saw a tiny smile on his face, and something inside her loosened. It was strange. This place, this human, didn't feel dangerous. It felt quiet. She stood slowly, her legs still weak. He handed her a small cup with something warm inside. Not food, just water and crushed herbs. "For your stomach," he said. "You ate too fast last night." She nodded and drank the bitter taste washing down easily. Jason gave her space, let her sit near the heater again. He didn't hover, didn't stare, just watched the pan as if it was more important than her. "Why did you help me?" she finally asked. Jason didn't look at her, just shrugged. "You were hungry," he said. "That's enough." Lyra frowned, confused. "No one helps anyone without reason," she whispered. He turned and looked straight into her eyes. "I'm not everyone," he replied simply. She didn't know what to say to that, so she stayed silent and watched him cook. The food today was better. A thick paste of beans, root vegetables, and some kind of dried meat. It smelled amazing, and Lyra's stomach growled loudly. Jason handed her a bowl without a word, then sat and ate from his own. They ate together, in silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, like something normal in a world that was anything but. After she finished, she wiped the bowl clean with her fingers. Jason saw it and chuckled, still hungry. She nodded, embarrassed. He reached into a storage box and tossed her a small dry ration. She caught it with wide eyes. That bar could have been sold for credits. "You save this for yourself?" she asked. Jason shrugged again. "Now it's yours." Lyra stared at the bar, her hands trembling. No one had ever given her food just like that. No trade, no demand, no look of hunger in return. She looked at him again, trying to understand what he wanted from her. Still, she couldn't believe he wanted nothing, so she whispered again, "Do you want me now?" Jason's face darkened, his voice cold. "No," he said, "and don't ask again." Lyra flinched, then looked away. She wanted to cry, but not from pain, from something else, something deep and confused inside her chest. She had learned the rules of survival long ago. Give your body, get a meal, stay quiet, stay low. But Jason was rewriting her rules without asking, and she didn't know what to do with that. "Help me fix the vent," Jason said suddenly. She looked up, confused. "What?" "You have small fingers," he said. "The filter's stuck." "I can't reach it." Lyra hesitated, then nodded slowly. He handed her a tool, showed her where to crawl. The vent was tight, dusty, full of broken wires and sharp edges. But she worked carefully as he guided her from outside when she pulled the filter free. Jason clapped once. "Nice," he said. She smiled a small, unsure smile, but it felt good. She had done something useful, not with her body, but with her hands. And for the first time in months, she felt like a person again. Later that evening, as the heater buzzed and the fire dimmed, Lyra sat near the wall, hugging her knees. Jason was cleaning his gear, humming an old tune. It wasn't a happy song, but it wasn't sad either. Just quiet, just human. "Can I stay another night?" she asked softly. Jason didn't look up, just said, "You can stay as long as you want." Her eyes widened, not from surprise, but from something deeper. Something like trust, trying to grow again. She nodded and whispered, "Thank you." That night, she slept closer to the fire. Not because she feared him, but because it was warm, and for once, so was her heart. The hunger was still there, the fear still hiding in her bones. But now, beside this strange human, Hope had started to rise like a small flame, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't for sale anymore. And a small fire began to burn, not just in the heater, but in Lyra's heart. A fire called Hope. Asterisk. Lyra was learning silence again. But this silence was different from the one she had lived in before. It wasn't the silence of fear, hunger, or waiting to be hurt. It was calm, filled with the sound of tools clicking, heaters humming, and wind brushing against the old shack's walls. And sometimes, it was filled with Jason's low humming, the kind that said, "I'm not lonely, but I'm alone." Days passed slowly. Jason worked during the day, scavenging, fixing, trading scrap. Lyra stayed behind at the shack, cleaning, repairing. Trying to be useful, she wanted to repay him, even if he never asked her to. She also watched him carefully. He was not like other men. He didn't ask questions about her past. He didn't try to control her, didn't expect anything from her body. But he did notice everything. If she limped, he brought a cloth. If she coughed, he gave her herbs. If she looked away, too fast, he didn't push her to speak, he just waited. 1 afternoon, Lyra was cleaning the solar panel when Jason returned. His jacket was covered in red dust, and his arm had a new scratch. "Bad trade?" she asked softly. He chuckled. "Worse bad weather and bad people." She walked up to him and offered a clean cloth. Jason took it and nodded. "Thanks." Then she did something strange. She sat down beside him and asked, "Can I help?" "Next time." Jason looked at her like she had grown wings. "You want to come scavenging?" She nodded. "I'm not weak anymore." Jason stared for a second, then shrugged. "All right. But you follow my lead." That was all. No big speech, no warning, just trust. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not because she was scared, but because her heart beat strangely, fast and warm, like it did when she was a child and her mother would braid her hair before market day. She missed that feeling, the feeling of belonging even for a moment. In the morning, Jason handed her a small knife and a bag. "Don't use the knife unless you have to," he said, "and never run unless I tell you to." She nodded like a soldier, and they set off. The outpost was loud and chaotic. People shouted, machines sparked, deals were made with whispers, or guns. Lyra stayed close to Jason, watching how he moved, calm but alert. He didn't show fear, but he always watched corners, always kept a hand near his tool belt. She saw how people respected him, or maybe just didn't want to mess with him. Either way, she felt safer beside him. At one stall, a trader tried to charge too much for a broken power core. Jason argued, his voice steady. Lyra noticed the trader's hand slipping under the table toward a weapon. She stepped forward and slammed her knife down on the counter. "Try it," she said coldly. The trader froze, blinked, then backed off. Jason raised an eyebrow but didn't scold her. Instead, he handed her the core and said, "Good eyes, later." As they walked back with a small cart of parts, he asked, "Where'd you learn to spot that move?" Lyra's voice was soft. "People tried to hurt me before. I remember the signs." Jason didn't answer, just nodded. But that nod said more than words. It said, "I believe you. I respect you. I trust you." Back at the shack, they repaired 2 solar batteries and rewired the heater. Jason taught her how to use a plasma wrench. She was quick, faster than expected. Her hands careful and smart, he noticed, and said, "You're good at this." Lyra smiled. A real one. This time, not forced, not tired. "I like fixing things," she said. "Not people. Not myself, but things." Jason looked at her for a moment, then said, "You're doing fine at both." She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. But later that night, as they sat by the heater, Lyra whispered, "Do you think I'm broken?" Jason looked at the fire for a long time, then replied, "Everyone's broken in some way, Lyra, but that doesn't mean they're worthless." She looked down, unsure. "You feed me," she said. "You give me a place to sleep. You protect me, but I don't give you anything back." Jason shook his head. "You're wrong." She looked at him, confused. "You give me peace," he said. "You give me a reason to wake up and keep building something." Lyra felt her chest tighten, not with pain, but with something like warmth. She had always been treated like a tool, like a price tag, like a thing. But here, now, Jason didn't see her as a thing. He saw her, and slowly, Lyra began to see herself too. Not as currency, not as trash, but as a person. Hungry, yes, but not for food anymore. Now, she was hungry for hope, for healing, for life. And beside this quiet human with tired hands and kind eyes, she was finally being fed. The wind outside howled like a wounded beast. Inside the shack, the heater hummed quietly as Lyra tightened a loose wire near the power board. Jason watched her from the workbench, adjusting a fuel converter with his worn-out gloves. Neither of them spoke much anymore. They didn't need to. Their silence had grown comfortable. Like to people who had learned how to breathe in the same rhythm, it had been nearly 2 weeks since the first bowl of soup. 2 weeks since a girl offered her body for food. Now, she was something else, still thin, still tired, but stronger. She moved with purpose, her hands steady, her back straighter. Sometimes she even laughed. And when she did, Jason would pause to listen. Like her laugh reminded him of something important he had forgotten long ago. But peace never lasted long in a place like this. One afternoon, while Jason was away gathering scrap, Lyra stayed behind to clean tools. The shack door was locked, the windows reinforced with steel mesh. She felt safe, for once. Until the silence broke with a knock, then another, louder, then the door shook. Followed by a voice she recognized, one she had hoped to never hear again. "Well, well," the voice growled. "Pretty little alien girl hiding in a human's nest." Lyra froze, her hands gripping the wrench so tightly her knuckles turned white. It was Carve, one of the local gang leaders who used to sell girls like her to off-world buyers. He had seen her once in the outpost and tried to trade for her. Jason had warned him off, but Carve didn't forget insults. And now he had found her again. "I know you're in there," Carve hissed from outside. "Come out now, and I won't break your legs." Lyra's chest tightened, her breath sharp and fast. She looked at the vent, too small, the back door sealed shut, no way out. So she did the only thing she could. She armed herself. She slid the blade Jason gave her under her belt, took a deep breath, and waited. The lock shattered. The door burst open. Carve stepped in, 2 thugs behind him, laughing. "There you are," he grinned. "Your human isn't here to protect you now." Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she backed toward the heater, hand near the blade. Carve approached slowly. "You know, I was going to be nice one night of fun. And maybe I'd let you go." He reached for her arm. She moved fast, pulled the blade, slashed across his hand. He screamed, blood spilling. One of the thugs lunged forward. She kicked him in the knee. Hard, but she was still small, still weak. They grabbed her, threw her against the wall. Her head hit metal. Everything spun, her vision blurred. Then came the sound of a shotgun pumping. "Let her go." Jason's voice growled from the doorway. Carve froze. Jason stood there, coat torn, blood on his lip, but eyes blazing with rage. "I warned you once," he said. Stepping in, Lyra lay on the floor, dazed, watching as Jason aimed the gun without shaking. "Touch her again, and I'll paint this room with your insides." Carve growled, but backed off. "She's just a stray," he spat. "You think she's worth dying for?" Jason's voice was ice. "She's worth more than you'll ever be." The gang left, dragging Carve out, but not before he pointed and warned. "This isn't over, human." When they were gone, Jason dropped the gun and rushed to Lyra. She was bleeding from her temple, eyes fluttering. He held her gently, whispering, "I'm here. You're safe now." She clutched his shirt, her body shaking. I thought they'd take me again," she cried. Jason held her tighter. "Not while I'm breathing," he said, his voice cracking. He cleaned her wounds, set her down on the bed, and sat beside her the whole night. Lyra didn't sleep much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Carve's face. But when she opened them, she saw Jason. Always Jason.com, quiet, strong, and that gave her strength. The next morning, Jason started packing. "We're leaving," he said. "This place isn't safe anymore. Where will we go?" She asked. He nodded toward the North Ridge. "There's an old shipyard I worked at long ago, abandoned now, but we can fix it up." Lyra looked around the shack, the place that had become her first real home, and nodded. "If you go, I go," she whispered. They left before nightfall, carrying only what they could. The shack behind them now, just another broken place in a broken world. But ahead of them, across the dust-covered path, was something new. A chance, maybe not for a normal life, but for a life worth living. Lyra walked beside Jason, not behind him, and though her body still hurt, her soul was healing to broken people. Walking through a broken world, but not alone anymore. The old shipyard looked like a graveyard of giants, metal bones stretched out across the valley. Huge, rusted ship frames lay half-buried in sand and ash. Torn wires hung like vines. Broken engines sat like forgotten hearts. It was dead, cold, and silent, but to Jason and Lyra, it was freedom. "This was once a repair bay for freighters," Jason said as they climbed over a fallen wing. "Now it's ours." Lyra didn't speak at first. She walked slowly, running her hand over the warm hull of an old cargo vessel. It was cracked, but not beyond hope, like her. She turned to Jason and asked softly, "Can we make it fly again?" Jason gave her a tired smile. "Maybe not soon, but someday." They picked the largest ship still standing on its legs. The cargo hold was mostly intact, with room for beds, supplies, and workstations. Jason set up the heater, patched a hole in the ceiling. Lyra cleaned dust off the panels and sealed broken vents. The work was hard, but it made them sweat instead of starve. And sweat was better, much better. At night, they lit a small fire in the engine room. Lyra cooked from old ration packs while Jason repaired tools. They ate side by side, not saying much. But every now and then, their eyes met, and that was enough. One morning, Lyra woke up to find Jason outside, staring at the sunrise. He had a small device in his hand, an old data pad, cracked but still glowing. She sat beside him, and he handed it to her. It was a photo, a woman and a child, human, both smiling. "Both gone, my wife," Jason said quietly, and my daughter Lyra's hands trembled as she held the device. "What happened?" Jason's eyes stayed on the horizon. "War happened," he said. "Council chose not to interfere. Colony burned. I lived. They didn't." Lyra closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Not your fault." Then he looked at her, really looked. "You remind me of her, my daughter." He said, "Not in the way you look, but in the way you fight to live." Lyra felt something break inside. But it wasn't painful. It was soft, like a shell cracking open to let something grow. Later that week, they found a half-broken solar battery in one of the smaller ships. Lyra dragged it back by herself, dirt covering her arms and face. Jason stood at the ramp, watching with folded arms. "You're stronger than you think," he said, as she dropped the battery with a grunt. "I have to be," she said, smiling. For the first time, it wasn't a sad smile, it was proud. They installed the battery, fixed the power lines, and got one wing's lights working. It blinked like a heartbeat, alive again one evening. While tightening bolts inside the cockpit, Lyra asked, Do you think people like us can ever belong somewhere? Jason leaned back in his seat, wiping grease from his hands. Home isn't always a place, he said. Sometimes it's just a person you don't want to lose. Lyra didn't answer, but her hands slowed. She understood more than he knew. The next day, they painted the side of the ship with old tools. The letters were shaky. But clear Freedom 7, Jason looked at it and raised an eyebrow. 7. Lyra shrugged. Lucky number. He smiled. Fair enough. That night, they sat under the stars, wrapped in old blankets. Lyra rested her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. You saved me, Jason. He shook his head gently. No, you saved yourself. I just gave you a place to try. She looked up at him, eyes shining in the firelight. Then let me save you too. Jason didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. They stayed like that for a long time, two broken souls sitting in a broken shipyard, but together, and that made all the difference. A place to belong doesn't need walls or maps. Sometimes it's just where someone looks at you and sees more than pain. More than scars, they see you and they stay. The days at the shipyard grew quieter, but never dull. Lyra and Jason worked on the Freedom 7 each morning. They repaired circuits, replaced panels, and rewired old consoles, bit by bit. The ship began to breathe again. Lights flickered back to life. Doors began to slide open with a hiss. Lyra, no. Longer it looked like a starving girl. Her skin had color now. Her eyes had fire. Jason had changed too. He smiled more, talked more, even laughed. They were not just surviving anymore. They were living, but peace in a world like theirs never stayed for long. It happened on a bright afternoon. Lyra was up on the roof panel, adjusting a loose solar link. Jason was working below when the sky darkened with shadow. They looked up, and there it was, a sleek, black ship descending. It wasn't old or rusted like the others. It was new, fast, and polished. A rich man's ship. Jason's face tightened. As the vessel touched down, he motioned for Lyra to get inside, but she had already frozen. The logo on the ship's side was one she recognized. A golden claw wrapped around a red jewel. Her breath caught in her throat. She had seen it before. She had run from it. The ramp hissed open, and a tall alien stepped out. His skin was smooth, his eyes glowing green. He wore rich robes and walked like he owned everything he saw. He looked around, then smiled when he saw Lyra. There you are, he said, like speaking to a lost pet. I've come to collect my property. Jason stepped between them immediately. She's not property, he said flatly. The alien known as Belvoir laughed softly. She ran from a contract she offered herself, and I accepted. She belongs to me by trade law. Jason didn't move. She doesn't belong to anyone. Belvoir stepped closer, eyes narrowing. You don't understand? Human. I paid for her transport, her food, her protection, Jason growled. You paid to trap her. Same thing, Belvoir replied coldly. Now move aside. Lyra trembled, but stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but firm. I said no then, and I say no now. Belvoir blinked, like he hadn't expected her to speak. You think living with this scrap collector gives you value? I gave myself value, she replied. He just reminded me I had it. Belvoir's eyes turned cold. Fine, he said. Then let's deal like traders. He threw a large crate on the ground. It burst open with stacked credit chips, food packs, and tools. All of this for her. Take it. Jason didn't even look. No, he said. Take your credits and leave. The alien's expression turned from smooth to sharp. I don't like being refused. Good, Jason said, cocking his shotgun. You'll hate this next part, but Belvoir wasn't alone. 3 mercenaries stepped from the ship, armed and armored. Jason stood his ground, weapon raised. Lyra stepped beside him. No blade, no armor, just her voice. She's not for sale. She said again, louder this time, "And if you try to take me, I'll die before I go with you." Belvoir hesitated, then raised a hand to signal his men. Lyra saw the danger coming, but she didn't run. She stepped forward, standing between the mercenaries and Jason. "He gave me food," she shouted. "He gave me freedom, not chains. You want a deal?" She snapped. "Then here it is, get off our land, and I won't burn your ship to the ground." Jason blinked. Even he hadn't expected that. Belvoir stared at her, then laughed. "You've grown fangs, little stray." Then he turned and walked back to his ship. "Very well, I see no profit here," he muttered. "But remember, girl, no one gives something for free." Not forever. The ramp closed, and the black ship rose into the sky, and then it was gone. Lyra stood there, breathing hard, her hands shaking. Jason lowered his gun slowly, watching her. "You okay?" "No," she whispered. "But I didn't run." Jason nodded, pride in his eyes. "No, you didn't." Later that night, as they sat under the stars, Lyra leaned her head against Jason's arm. "I was so scared," she said. Jason nodded. "I was too." She looked up at him. "Would you have fought them all for me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "I wouldn't let anyone take you. Ever." And in that silence, they both understood what they meant to each other now. Not owner and rescued, not protector and victim. Something stronger. Something chosen. They didn't need papers or money or power. They had a ship, a fire, and each other. And sometimes that was more than enough. The stars were quiet that night. Lyra sat in the cockpit of the Freedom 7, her fingers moving gently across the dusty control panel. Jason lay on the old cot behind her, breathing slowly, his chest wrapped in bandages. He had been hurt in a trade. Run gone wrong, nothing deadly, but enough to keep him down for a few days. And now, everything depended on her. Lyra stared through the cracked glass window at the open sky. Her reflection looked back, not the broken girl from the outpost, not the hungry shadow offering her body for food. This was someone new, someone who had earned her place, someone who had learned to fly. The power core they had repaired flickered again. Steady now, she smiled and ran a hand over the warm metal. "You're ready, old girl," she whispered. "And so am I." The next morning, she was up early, double-checking the systems, cleaning filters, tightening bolts. Jason groaned from his cot, lifting his head slowly. "You're working too hard," he muttered. She turned and grinned. "You told me this ship would never fly again." Jason raised an eyebrow. "And now it will." She nodded. "We just need one more test, and I'm doing it today." He tried to sit up, wincing alone. "You can't even tie your boots right now," she said, walking over to him. "You need rest. I'll be fine." Jason looked at her, concern in his eyes. She knelt beside him. "Trust me," he hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Okay," he said, "but come back in one piece." She smiled. "Always." Lyra climbed into the pilot's chair, the straps tight across her chest. She pressed a button, and the main engine growled to life. Not smooth, not strong, but alive. Dust and old leaves blew across the hangar floor. The ship trembled under her hands. "Let's do this," she whispered. The Freedom 7 lifted off the ground for the first time in years. Not high, not far, just a few meters up, hovering above the metal ground, but it was flying. Her hands gripped the controls, guiding the ship gently across the yard. She circled twice, avoiding debris, watching the sensors flicker green, and then she set it down, smooth and perfect. The engines hissed. The panels glowed. It had worked. Jason was waiting at the ramp, leaning against the wall with a proud smile. "You're a pilot now," he said. She ran to him and hugged him, laughing into his chest. "You built it," he said. "But you gave it wings. That night, they celebrated with a last to ration. Bars and warm tea, they sat on the roof of the ship, watching the stars in silence. "I was afraid," she said softly. "Up there in the sky." Jason nodded. "Fear means you care." She looked at him. "Do you think the world out there is ready for me?" He smiled. "I think it's been waiting for you." A few days later, the ship was ready to travel, not far. Just short flights to safer towns for trading. Jason was strong enough to walk again, though he still moved slow. They packed supplies, tools, maps, and old data disks. Lyra took the captain's seat. Jason didn't argue. He trusted her hands more than his own as the ship rose into the night sky. Lyra looked back at the valley, at the old shipyard where she had once arrived, broken and afraid, and now she was leaving whole and alive. "I never thought I'd leave this place," she whispered. Jason, standing beside her, said, "Sometimes we don't fly to escape. We fly because we've grown." They passed over ridges and ruins. Under pale moons and star trails, Lyra's eyes sparkled with quiet joy. She had found her wings, not because someone gave them to her, but because someone believed she had them all along. As the Freedom 7 flew into the dark, Lyra spoke one last thing. "I offered my body once, thinking it was all I had." Jason didn't interrupt her. "But now, I know I have more." She said, "I have hands that fix, a mind that learns, a heart that feels." Jason placed a hand on her shoulder and a sky to conquer. He added, "They flew on into the stars, not as savior and saved, not as rescuer and rescued, but as partners, two broken souls, healed by kindness, lifted by trust, and bound by something stronger than any currency in the galaxy. Love." In that quiet ship, drifting across stardust and silence, she was no longer for sale. She was free.